This is going to be, if you follow us on social media, my wife posted and said, the next 2 weeks might feel a little bit less sermon-y and much more audience participatory. That'll work. A little bit more audience participatory. So we're going to do 2 weeks. The series is called A Unified Story. Everybody say A Unified Story. And the first week is called Time and Space. Say Time and Space. And the second week is called Books, Not Book. Great. How many of you own a Bible? How many of you have read the whole thing from cover to cover? Okay. I had to do it several times. I had to. They'd quiz you on it in seminary several times over and over. How many of you think this is very long? It seems to be a very complicated book, and it might be nice to have it broken down to maybe know how to approach this long book maybe a little easier. Great. That's what we're going to do. We're going to break down how to approach this book by looking at 2 parts of it. So the first week, we're going to look at 2 parts called time. Say time. And the second one is space. We're going to look at the time and the space of the Bible and how that can help us approach it better. And the second week, we're going to look at books with an S, not book, because my Bible is... let's see. That's the 2,463 pages long. That's a long book. But if you think that every one of the books in there was written for a particular space, a particular time by a person, and that they were moved together because they share a... Blake, if we could go to the title slide of this, we'll repeat this. They share a... Great. See how that goes? Great. So it's one big unified story that binds these together. So if we can gather up these kind of big narrative pieces and orient ourselves in setting, the time and the space, and that we can look at the books and appreciate them for what they are, I think we can approach it better. So we have I might not play the whole thing, actually. I might not even get to it, Blake. You can go sit down. Great source on it is, I'll just tell the story, because it turned out it was a 5-minute video, and I don't want to play the whole thing. So how many of you have heard of Egypt? How many of you know a Bible story that involves Egypt? Okay, this is participatory time. Who wants to tell me their Bible story that has Egypt in it, that they know? There's a lot of options. Moses. And what is the driving force of the setting there for Moses? Is Egypt the good guys or the bad guys? Bad guys, good. Let's think of another Egypt story. Does anyone know another one that's not Moses and the Exodus? Huh? Just not that one yet. Save that one for just a second. We'll get there in a minute. Do you know another one? Joseph. Great. And what happens? Is Egypt? Does he get sent to Egypt for a vacation? No. What's he sent there? His brothers sell him, and great. And he becomes this person in Egypt. It's not really great. There. So there's another one. Does anyone know a third Old Testament-y story that involves Egypt? Starts with A, ends in Braham. Great. Yes, and he gets told there's this promised land, but there's a famine at the time, and so he's like, I'll just go find my own food. And he wanders into Egypt, and he runs into Pharaoh, and he lies about who his wife is, and Pharaoh tries to marry his wife, and they end up having to flee. So Egypt, again, good, bad. Bad. Good. So there's a famine, something bad happening, and people get into Egypt. Egypt maybe not exactly the best, and then they have to flee from Egypt. So we see a pattern here. It happens with Abraham. Then Joseph, he gets sold into slavery. The brothers, there's a famine, and they have to go to Egypt, and then they get sold into slavery, which leads us into Moses, where they're enslaved, and they have to flee after. You with me? Okay. Now, what was the one you said, AJ? What happens with Jesus? They go to Egypt, right? In his young story in Matthew, it says he goes to Egypt. What is your expectation? Now you've heard these stories, maybe you've grown up with them. When they go to Egypt, what happens? Bad things. But AJ, what happens with Jesus in Egypt? Nothing. But why are they going there? They're leaving for safety into Egypt. Do you feel the expectation shift? If you grow up in these narrative stories, you hear... Egypt, bad, famine, we flee into there, and then we escape because it's bad. But in this Jesus story, the table is sort of upended, and we have Jesus going into Egypt for safety. So you see the setting, you can have expectations. It's like if you see a movie with a haunted house, your expectation is it's going to be a scary movie. So if you enter it and the ghost is making pancakes and suddenly you realize you're watching Casper, you see the expectation shift slightly. With me? Great. So setting can tell us a whole bunch. Having this sort of background setting can help set our expectations. Jesus is going to do it a lot with parables, which is our next sermon series, where he has a setting, he sets the people in where they have an expectation for the outcome. So understanding the time, the space, that setting can help set our expectations for the story. So if we understand those a little better. All right. Quick introduction. My name is Phil. We've met each other before. I'm from a little town nearby called Huntington. Boo, Columbia City people in Huntington. I was a band kid. I was in the marching band. I did theater. I have a lot of siblings. Let's see, what else? I was a good student, but I didn't try very hard, If I applied myself, I probably would have been a better student. Who wouldn't have been, if you apply a little better? That's me. Now, my wife is from a town nearby called South Whitley. Do we have an opinion about South Whitley if you're from Columbia City? Is there an opinion? Boo, we don't like South Whitley. Boo, Whitco, or something. I don't know. And so she was an honor roll student. She was student council. She was goody two-shoes. She was an athlete, I think, at some point. She said she played shortstop and softball. We're very different. We're very different. And somehow our two stories, even though we only apparently grew up several miles from each other, she lives just South Whitley, I live almost in South Whitley, we share a completely different background, how we do things. One of the first things we figured out when we were married and Charlie came along was, I can't tell that story because of the presence in the room, actually. You have to change. Okay, we'll just do a more generic one. It's not bad. I don't want to ruin things for people if it's possible to be ruined. It'll make sense. If some of you want to know the story, I can tell it later. Yes, it's because there's youngers in the room. Not bad. Anyway, we'll talk about something else. Like Thanksgiving. And so when we got married and we did Thanksgiving, we had to decide, how do you do Thanksgiving? How do you do this? Whose house do you go to? Who cooks? When you set up for Halloween, do we go out and trick or treat, or are we the people who sit and hand candy out? For where do we hang stockings? When do those all things happen? And it was one of those weird, you're like, why are we disagreeing about this? Because I have an expectation because of my story, my history, how things are run. And she has one too. Who cooks, who cleans? We do premarital counseling. I do premarital counseling. One of the things we talk about is which way we're going to take a poll, because I think you don't even realize this is a thing until it's a thing. How many of you have a dishwasher, like a mechanical machine, and it sprays water? Good. When you put a silverware in there, a fork, does the fork go down or does the fork go up in there? We're going to see very different people here in a second. How many of you are fork up people? How many of you are fork down people? See, you don't even know the other people exist. You don't even know. It turns out Ash and I are different. And I stabbed myself on a fork many a times because I'd reach in to put something in, I'd stab myself with a fork, and it leads to little tension. That's a silly one. But our stories, the way we grow up, we have expectations for things. But we become one story. So here's what I want us to do. We're going to talk about some people in the Old Testament that have some stories, and this is why we're in circles. I'm going to set a timer. I'm actually going to say, hi Siri, 1 minute, okay? I want you to think, you can type them on your phone, in 1 minute and try to name at least 7 people, characters, persons, from the entire narrative of the Bible, and you cannot use Jesus. I'm taking him off the plate. You can't use that one. Ready? Okay, I'm going to set 1 minute. As many as you can come up with, and then we'll continue. Okay, ready? 3. Hey Siri, set a timer for 1 minute. Go. 1 minute. Don't worry, it's going to get harder, AJ. It's going to get harder. "30 seconds. All right, if you think you got them, here's the second part of it. I'll just extend the timer. I want you to put them in the order they appear chronologically. Right? Little harder. Little harder. A little bit harder. We said a few this morning: Abraham, Joseph. Don't open your Bibles. Don't cheat. No cheating. No cheating. Okay, if you think you can maybe put them in a little order, I want each of you to just say the one character in there, the one person, who you think you identify the most with. Right? Who in there are you like, I think I know this person pretty good? Go ahead. Who is it? Talk amongst yourselves. Who's your one? You're like, this is my guy. I don't know who mine's Philip. Mine is Philip. All right. Keep thinking. But who is a character that you wrote down that you're like, if I had to, I could tell you everything about this person? Anybody got one? They're like, I know everything about him. Major, your eye's very confident. No? Adam? That's pretty good. Tell me, what's Adam's story?
Well, he was made.
Okay.
Take care of the Garden of Eden.
Good.
And then he listened to his wife, and bad things happened.
That is certainly a way to tell that story. That's certainly a way to tell it. How does Adam connect to the big story?
Started it all?
Okay, so he's the earliest character.
Yeah.
Is he the earliest character?
I mean, God.
Who made him? Great. Okay, so see, you're like Adam's first, but really is Adam first? So all right, so think about this. If I wanted to let you know about me, and I did a horrible job earlier, I'm going to say intentionally. It might not have been. You tell a story to get people to know who you are. So if I wanted you to know a little bit about my background, I could tell you a very funny story that involves me being in a theater production where I played a body. That's it. I didn't move. I played a body. And I had to ride out on a horse, and someone tampered with the horse, and they broke it, and so the strap broke, and at one point, as I was a body with my legs being the horse, as I was going off the stage, the strap broke, the thing fell, and a nail was sticking out, and it pierced into my behind on the stage. And I was a dead body at that time, and so I had no option to just stand up and say, ouch, so I kicked myself off the stage using the legs of the horse when I grabbed a piece of scenery with the head of the horse, and I drug the scenery off the stage with me. What are some things that you know about me from a story where I was in a theater show where I played a dead body and I was committed to the bit, and what do you know about me? What are some things, just hearing that story, what do you know? Yes? Classy? Klutzy. Perfect. That would describe me very well. Someone over here. Besides the show? The show must go on, right? I was like, I can't just stand up. I'll ruin the mystery, right? What other things, just generally about what I do? Okay. And I did what in high school? Good. And a klutz. Good. Anything else you can maybe derive? Maybe. I certainly baby. I got off and I was like, I'm wounded. I'm wounded. No. So, yeah, I didn't scream. I should have. I got a tetanus shot after that. I don't like needles. That's an extra bit of the story. Maybe that's why I don't like needles. Bad experience with nails. But you can pick some things. If you want to know about somebody, one of the best ways to know is to have them tell you something about their story. Like, knowing someone's story is usually a really good way for us to identify. Do we agree with that? Like, it's way more fun for someone to be like, well, let me tell you about when we moved into whatever, because you're going to know that blah, blah, blah. Good? That is a very Western cultural thing that we tell about ourselves. That our wants, our desires, the things that we are a part, that we want to do, that we experience, what makes us happy. It's very individualistic. And so that would be very different for the people in the old-time setting of the Bible. Okay, I'm going to use this acronym a few times, and I'll just explain it. So I say A-N-E. So if you hear me say Annie or A-N-E, it's Ancient Near East. So the people who live, I have slides. I never have slides. Around here. Egypt, the Canaan, Palestine, Israel area, up and around into Mesopotamia, down into Babylonia. Do you see kind of where we are? These are ancient Near Eastern people way back in the day. They're very different. And so we tell a lot of stories about ourselves to understand, whereas they are almost exclusively identified by the group that they belong to. So it's a very collectivist, it's not very individualistic. We take pride in being individuals. I can do this. I'll go to Home Depot and I will take care of this myself because I am a rugged individualist. I'm like a frontiersman. But not so much there. They're very dependent on the group they're a part of. So if you wanted to know more about Joseph, callback, before he sent into Egypt, you want to talk to him, he wouldn't be like, I happen to love very colorful coats. I'm also a pretty good shepherd, and I like to sing songs because I'm played by Donny Osmond. That would not be how he would say. He would say, I'm Joseph. I'm the son of, do we know that one? Jacob. Good. Jacob and sons. And he lives in an area, right? His identity, who he is completely enveloped by who he's a part of. Not anything about his individualist. Does that make sense? So who a group belongs to is very, very, very important. It supersedes knowing the individual nature of that person. And so individual, what we have, versus group collective. And so it leads to some things in the Bible. Jesus will say things like, you need to do this, which English does a terrible translation. It's y'all is a way better translation because it's speaking to a collective identity, a collective group. And so understanding when you see this, the sons and the fathers and these relationships, like the parable of the prodigal son, there's a lot of connection because he's cutting away from what he identifies as when he leaves his father, because that's all of his identity. And we'll break these down as we get into it, but knowing some of this will be very helpful. So the other thing I just said is, how many of you know that the Bible was not written in English? Great. The Old Testament is written in, do we know? Hebrew, and the New Testament was written in Greek. But the language that they spoke was another language called Aramaic. That's very, very, very closely related to Hebrew. And so whenever you do any of the translations and we read things, sometimes there's some funny translation notes that happen. And so we have people of a different time, a different place, a different language that we're attempting to learn more about. And there's always funny translation things that happen. Like in the book of Revelation, the Greek doesn't have a word for green. Did you know that? There's not really a word to describe green. And so when you see in Revelation, the horse that represents death is what color? Pale. And they'll usually put like parenthesis green because there just isn't a word for it. And so you get into some of these weird like color things where they'll describe things and you're like, that's not what color that is. Well, they don't have a word for that. And so becomes translation things that become hard to understand. I took Spanish for like 1 semester, so please, comments on YouTube and everyone in this room, forgive me for my Spanish. If you wanted to say like, in English, if you wanted to be fun and whatever, and you wanted to say goodbye to someone, what sort of phrase might you say that involves an animal to say goodbye? See you later, alligator. Are you with me? If I translated that to Spanish, the Spanish speaker would be like, why is there an alligator in the room? Idioms don't translate well. In Spanish, they say something, when they say like, how would you say what's up in English? Like, I just said it, but how would you say like, how are you doing in English? Like, what's going on? What would you say? Like a little idiom. What's up, dog? Maybe? I don't know. What up, dog? I don't know. I'm hip. But in Spanish, this is like the only Spanish I even remember. I forgot it all to learn Hebrew. They would say, ¿Qué pasa, calabaza? Which means, what's going on, pumpkin? Doesn't really translate to English. Or like if they'd say nothing much, they'd say nada nada limonada, which is nothing lemonade. Do you see how it just doesn't translate right? So sometimes when you're reading in English, you're kind of like maybe this sounds funny. It's because there's some idioms or colloquialisms going on. Famously in the Old Testament with the story of Elijah, he's committing to the worshipers of Baal for them to prove that Baal exists, to light a fire on fire. And it's just not happening. And in English, Elijah says, what is he behind the bush? Is he busy? This is how it translates in English. Well, in Hebrew, that's what it says, but it rhymes and sounds really close to, is he using the bathroom? It's the first poop joke in the Bible. But we don't catch that. Do you see how some of these things disappear and appear because we're reading in a different language, of people in a different time, a different space, different culture, different all these things? Great. So, ladies, I apologize for the next few minutes. It is a very male-centric society. So the head male of the family household is in charge of the protection of absolutely everybody. So if anybody got lost, if anyone was in a bond they couldn't find their way out of, it was up to the oldest living male to take care of everybody. They were absolutely in charge. It's a patriarchy full and full, but they had a ton of responsibility to take care of the people in their household. And the way that it worked was the oldest male had the most land, and then the first son got half of that inheritance when they passed, and the other sons split that amongst themselves, and they took the rest of it. So the oldest son then splits that in half, and so the oldest son always has the largest portion of whatever the land and inheritance would be. But they inherit the responsibility to take care of everybody else. Women, I'm sorry, you had no authority in biblical times. I'm sorry. I really am. But it helps understand some of these stories where you see like, boy, there's a lot of women elevated in Jesus' ministry or in the teachings or in the writings. That would be very weird. One of the greatest points that my New Testament professor said, if I had to have one reason why I knew that the resurrection was a true story, it's because the people who reported on it were women. And if you wanted people to believe it was true, it certainly wouldn't have been women that reported it first. It would have been the men. You would never have had women be the first tellers because this is the society that exists in this time. And so this father's house is the protective shell. Its space is made for everyone in it to say that you're part of this family. And it's the father, the oldest male's job to make sure everyone is taken care of and all those things. And so inheritance then is passed through the sons, through this house as they get different pieces of it. So this nuclear family, like what we think of, is not normal. So in my household, it's me, my wife, my daughter, my soon-to-be daughter, and a dog. We are like the most typical American family. 1.5 children and an animal. Like, it's the most typical imaginable thing, and that's not here at all. The nuclear family doesn't exist. It's the father and then all of the subset that live underneath the umbrella of it. It's one giant home that they're all a part of. And it's a different mindset for them as well. So it's the whole world is non-compartmentalized. So I have a banker, I have someone who does retirement, I have, I can go somewhere and eat a sandwich. My job, well, I'm a terrible example because my job is my faith, but my wife works at Vera Bradley. It has nothing to do with her Christian faith whatsoever. She's got all these different connections. We live a very compartmentalized society. We have very specializations. Does that make sense? Totally different for them. Religion and life go completely hand in hand. So if your crops are going poor, it's related to your temple offering, and there's people who are a part of the regular daily life that are all a part of this. And so you make all these offerings to things in order to help out in certain areas of your life. It's completely intertwined. Everything is connected, faith to the social life as well. And so what I want to do is show you how this understanding of the father-centric, this male-dominated, the religion is intertwined with everything, all these things go together. So I have one last piece of thing to tell you, and then I want you to read a section together, and we're going to talk about it for the last couple minutes. Are we good? Great. In the New Testament in particular, we are dealing with right here is Roman occupied. Rome, big empire situated off the screen over here, right here. Great. And they are occupied, and they've instilled governors into the promised land that we hear about in the Old Testament, and they're ruling everybody in there. They're collecting taxes, and the Jews that live in the area are unhappy about this. And so there's this tension amongst people who expect that God is at some point going to liberate the Holy Land from the occupied Romans. And this is the tension that we're going to feel in the New Testament as we go through it. And so there's a tension between the Jews that are practicing their worship and the Roman occupied governors that are keeping order, making sure everyone's in charge. And there's a second tension that exists, which is between organized Jewish faith and Jesus' followers. He seems to be flipping the tables on the expectations of what's going on. So the disciples that are following him have kind of followed a guy who's quite literally going to flip tables at the center of faith. And remember how intertwined all of faith in society is. So you have someone disrupting basically the entire nature of the world that they're existing in. So I want to read John 13. So with your people around you, John 13:31 through 14:24. Just with the people around you for the next couple minutes. Read it, and I want you to think through these two questions. What is the setting of this story? So what is it? Where are they? What's going on? Trickle in some of this stuff to it. And then what is your expectation of what Jesus says he's going to go do? I don't want to say too much because it'll give it away. Does that make sense? 5 minutes, read that and chat with each other. What's going on? What's the setting? And what are the disciples feeling? That's what I want to get to. Okay, go.
Can you say what it is again?
John 13:31 through 14:24. It's only like 20 verses. It's very short. $14:14. I had a typo. Just $14:14. I put 24. It's actually just 14. Great. What's setting? Where are they? What's happening? Just give me your general setting. And then what's the disciples' emotional state? What do you have there? And then Jesus' response to it is to do something. And what do you sense about that? Just it's very vague. I'm trying to let your brains run wild.
They're in the upper room.
Okay, so they're in the upper room. Give me some more, maybe you have a little bit more Bible history knowledge. What's going on up there? What's Jesus telling them?
He's telling them that he's about to be crucified.
Okay, he's saying he's about to go be put to death. Did we catch that in there? And the disciples, what's their general response? What did we catch? Okay, who does? One in particular, right? Peter wants to go with him. Let's put ourselves, we're going to go mindset into setting. Okay, they are hanging out in downtown, the center of the world for Jewish faith. And Jesus is telling them he's going to go be killed. These guys following him are between 14 and probably 18 years old. And they've been following him. So just generally speaking, who is in charge of downtown Israel? We just said it. The Romans. And they're there to make sure there's no unpeace. They want to keep the peace. right? And Jesus knows that he's going to be sent to kill. These guys have decided they're going to follow him, and he's been causing a bit of a stir, we'll say. He's been causing a bit of a stir with the religious leaders. So when Jesus says he's going to go, he's not going to be with them anymore, one of them, who walks around with his foot in his mouth for basically the whole Bible, named Peter, says he's going to go with him. The other 11 keep pretty quiet. What do you think they're keeping quiet about? Just think about it. Put yourself in this mindset. This is how we got to think. We're in a setting, there's Roman occupied. They don't want anyone disturbing the peace. Jesus has been disturbing the peace. There won't be Jesus anymore, so would you say maybe they're maybe a little frightened? He's leaving. And Jesus even responds to it in 14. He says, don't let your hearts be troubled. He senses trepidation in the room. Not because we might read this and say, well, that's a bum Jesus is leaving. Now they're worried. Like, well, this really nice guy's leaving. But there's some background flames burning, isn't there? Just a little bit. Without Jesus, who we've said we're going to follow, who's been making people who are in charge of keeping the peace mad and the people in charge of our life mad, if he's not here and they're going to kill him, then maybe I'm a little uneasy. Do you sense that a little bit now? It's easy for us to just go, well, that's a bum. They're really sad Jesus is leaving. But it's way more than that. Their whole world is about to be upheld because the person they have who's been keeping the peace with them is not going to be there anymore. And Jesus says, don't let your heart be troubled. And he says he's going to do something. What is he going to go do? Go ahead. Prepare a place. And where does he say this place is? In his Father's house. Every ounce of my body is not singing the DC Talk. Is it Audio Adrenaline or DC Talk? I can't remember. Come and go with me to my Father's house. It's a big, big house, right? It's the mansion in the sky. How many of you, this is the picture. When he's like, I'm going into my Father's house. He's going to float up on the cloud. There's going to be a big gold front gate, some manicured lawns, and a big mansion. We got that picture in our head, right? Are we there? How many of you, that's your take? Because this is what we've got. Big, strong hands. It's okay. I'll put my hand up too. But let's put ourselves in this mindset. The household is who's in. How do they find their primary identity? How does someone in this time frame, what is their primary identity? Who your father is. Whose house you live in. Okay? And Jesus says, I'm going to go to my Father's house and I'm going to do what? Prepare. Does it say rooms for you? A lot of translations don't say rooms. It says, I'll prepare you a place to dwell, which is where we get this mansion. But I'm going to prepare you a room. A room. So he's giving them a primary identity in my Father's house. And when you're inside of a dwelling that has a male in charge, which in this case is God, the Father, right? What is their job? What is the primary responsibility of the male who's in charge of the household? Take care. Keep them safe, to give them identity. And so he has this group of frightened people. And he's not like, it's okay, someday when you die, there'll be a big mansion in the sky. That rhymed. And there'll be a golden gate and a fountain with like a cherubim that's spitting water out of its mouth for some reason. And it's floating and there's just platters of food. This isn't the image. This is what we say because we go, I'm a rugged individualist. I need my own space. I want a big house. This is our rugged individual I'm taking over. We see this space and we go, a mansion in the sky, right? I'm gonna ride that glory train, right? We're gonna end up there in pearly gates and I'm gonna have a mansion and I'll be by myself and it's gonna be amazing. But this isn't the picture. When it says he's going to his Father's house and I'm gonna build you a dwelling. I'm gonna go to and prepare you a room. I'm gonna divide up the property to give you a family, a purpose, and protection. Because what's their fear? That they don't have it anymore. Because they left their families to follow him. Right? Think a couple weeks ago we talked about Luke. You must no longer love your father and mother, you must follow me. They've left everything. Leave your nets behind. They abandon their father who's a fisherman to follow him. And suddenly the person who they've placed is leaving. And the comfort Jesus gives them is not someday you'll have a mansion, but you now have a new identity. Because when I go, the place for you is in this family. I'm not leaving. And I'm going to give you proof through the Spirit. That's where it keeps going on. And so it's not about a big mansion. It's about family, community, and connection. There's a total different connotation to that. It's not Jesus leaving and promising them a better future. It's him promising them a new identity now. And we get that when we just tear apart that setting and culture just a tiny bit. They're men with no home anymore. They left their father's household. They left their property, their inheritance to follow him, and they're being promised something greater. A new identity, a new purpose, new protection in the time of fear. It's really a time of comfort to them. That's why it's such a comforting phrase. I'm leaving, but I'm going to prepare a new home for you, a new family, a new unit, a new protection. And so, yeah, you see in John 13, does that make sense? Do we see it's just a little bit different? Just understanding this Roman-occupied, male-centered thing just gives a little taste of something different. That is what we're going to talk about today. Next week, we're going to talk about books, not book. Books, not book. So, come with your Bible, because we're going to look at how every book has a different writing style. How we don't read poetry the same as we read prose and all those things. And we're going to kind of break down how the Bible's laid out and how those overarching narratives help make sense, and how sometimes you have to find figurative language, which is hard to do when we read in different languages. So.